The person you find yourself continuously thinking about genuinely values you. It's real. However, what's actually responsible for the space separating you might catch you off guard. There is a particular kind of silence that isn't empty but weighted. It feels like something is already happening inside it before anything is said out loud, as if the space between two people has become a living thing with its own pulse. When you enter that space, you can sense that what is about to unfold is not casual or forgettable. It carries emotional density, the kind that settles slowly rather than arrives all at once. So pause for a moment, not as a ritual, but as a recognition that attention itself matters here. Because what follows is not meant for surface-level reading or distracted thought. It is meant for that quieter part of awareness where feelings are already forming before language has caught up to them. The part of you that notices what lingers after a conversation ends, not just what was said during it. In relationships like this, where depth exists but expression remains restrained, meaning often travels through absence as much as presence, through what is withheld, through what is felt but not yet spoken. And that creates a strange intensity, because the mind begins to fill in the gaps, tracing outlines around emotions that have not been fully named. It becomes less about what is explicitly communicated and more about what is sensed beneath it. That is why even simple moments can feel significant. A delay in response, a shift in tone, a silence that lasts a little longer than expected. Each one becomes part of an unspoken language that both people are, consciously or not, trying to understand. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because emotional depth tends to create its own gravity, and gravity does not require explanation to be felt. So as you move forward, recognize that what you are stepping into is not noise, not performance, not something designed to overwhelm you with intensity. It is something quieter than that, and therefore harder to ignore. It exists in the subtle spaces where connection is not fully spoken, but still undeniably present. And in those spaces, even the smallest shift can feel like it carries meaning that reaches further than words ever could. Whenever someone occupies your thoughts repeatedly, not randomly or infrequently, but persistently and consistently, there's usually substance behind it. It's rarely mere coincidence. And if separation has formed between you, whether that looks like emotional distance, geographic space, or complete radio silence, then what follows is worth your attention. What you're noticing isn't quite as straightforward as it initially appears. One essential thing to recognize is that the individual living in your awareness truly values you in their own distinct way. This affection doesn't announce itself through dramatic displays, grand romantic moments, or constant communication. Rather, it expresses itself in something much quieter, much more intense, and often challenging to interpret. This individual hasn't erased you or moved past this with ease. Fragments of you are woven through their everyday moments, and they hold on to memories of your voice, your expressions, and that particular quality of safety or acceptance you introduced into their existence. These recollections are preserved because they created deep impressions. So the natural question emerges: why the separation? Affection doesn't always move two individuals closer right away. Sometimes genuine attachment actually creates withdrawal, hesitation, and a need for internal evaluation before they're prepared to fully access their deepest feelings. Powerful affection specifically has a habit of triggering fear more readily than bravery. When someone experiences authentic care for you, something unfamiliar awakens within them, and they become conscious of their own limitations, what they might forfeit, and sections of themselves that might not feel equipped to offer completely. Your presence does more than touch their emotions. It also reaches their deepest insecurities, previous injuries that never finished healing, and anxieties they assumed they'd moved through. That can feel enormous. Affection has a tendency to make people face their own inadequacies with startling honesty. In many cases, those insecurities push someone to create separation even as their affection remains genuine and steadfast. It's critical to understand that space doesn't inherently signal disinterest or absence of regard. The quiet or distance often communicates an internal struggle where they're trying to process sensations that go beyond what language can hold. They might genuinely want to stay near, communicate genuinely, and express every feeling bubbling up inside them, but apprehension and self-doubt keep barring the way. Their brain fills with uncertainty. Do they measure up? Could they disappoint you? What if their care brings you hurt rather than joy? These questions can crush anyone who genuinely cares about someone. Stepping away becomes their mechanism for handling that psychological tension. Sometimes authentic care feels like a heavy burden. The greater the attachment, the more intense the instinct to shelter both you and themselves from suffering, abandonment, letdown, or heartbreak. This is why space functions as protective armor. If you're continuously occupying someone's mind but they keep moving away, understand that losing you might actually terrify them. Yet simultaneously, they might be uncertain about whether they're capable of cherishing you the way they believe you're entitled to be cherished. Expressing this openly becomes nearly impossible for them. Frequently, they can't even fully grasp their own emotional state. They're navigating between craving intimacy and feeling pressured to escape. The space they maintain becomes their only mechanism for containing these opposing drives. Every behavior and every absence of behavior carries underlying significance in these circumstances. When someone establishes distance, it doesn't necessarily signify an emotionally barren heart. Often it indicates a heart experiencing overwhelming sensation that requires capacity to organize what it's holding. Their care continues operating even when it stays hidden from external view. They contemplate you throughout stillness. They hold on to remembrances of your kindness. They return to conversations repeatedly in their imagination and consider how your presence has shifted their world. That's genuine love. Even though it appears as separation externally, their emotional reality frequently exists too deeply for ordinary language or constant contact to communicate it. Their devotion lives in those quiet instances, the pauses between things, and the invisible bonds that keep connecting their consciousness to yours. Processing a dynamic like this demands tolerance and the capacity to understand love not only through visible demonstrations, but also through restraint, quiet, and cautious hesitation. It describes a layered form of connection that places pressure on both people because it rarely travels a straightforward course. This type of bond expects understanding, generosity, and the readiness to perceive beyond what's obvious. You might experience confusion or suffering due to the space, yet the individual residing in your consciousness is frequently much more present than you understand. Their love persists across the stretches of quiet. In the end, the gap between you doesn't establish your importance or communicate the complete reality of what they're experiencing. It simply shows how intricate human emotions turn out to be when genuine attachment crosses paths with personal apprehension. Once you begin understanding the depth residing beneath the silence, you open yourself to comprehending love's actual character. Feeling doesn't constantly require loudness or visibility. Sometimes it builds through unspoken wishes, quiet consideration, and the distance that permits two hearts to maintain their connection while simultaneously permitting each other space to exist freely. When you recognize that separation, bear in mind that the individual might experience care in methods that operate beneath the surface yet hold true sensation and genuine weight. The separation isn't total emptiness. Rather, it reflects something preserved carefully in a spirit that navigates its own complications. They're processing personal anxieties, uncertainty, confusion, and emotional complications. Yet what they carry for you remains constant. It might not be easy or apparent, but it persists, quietly powerful and genuinely authentic. This circumstance doesn't arise from something you did incorrectly. Instead, it originated because you generated sensations in them that surfaced unexpectedly and with an intensity they hadn't anticipated they'd experience. The space you perceive isn't rejection at all. It functions more as emotional protection they've created. What you might find remarkable is that the separation exists because they experience genuine passion rather than insufficient passion. They sense that moving nearer would mean tumbling rapidly into sensations that feel intense, overwhelming, and deeply exposing. Vulnerability appears risky to them, and they worry about losing their emotional balance. Rather than embracing that emotional exposure, they select quiet and withdraw. Not because they harbor intent to cause you pain, but because they're attempting to guard themselves from probable suffering, letdown, or emotional destruction. The space shields them. Because in their perspective, you require someone who experiences themselves as more powerful, more balanced, and more whole than they currently perceive themselves to be. One demanding truth involves the way they see themselves against you. They recognize your emotional readiness, your ability to be transparent, and your willingness to care completely. Rather than experiencing encouragement from those qualities, they occasionally become unsettled by them. They question whether they can ever reach that emotional depth. Subsequently, they pull back and convince themselves that they require additional time to work through their issues or develop further before they can genuinely draw near. In this manner, the separation becomes a complicated form of devotion that impacts both individuals. Their consciousness wages a hidden conflict while you sit with the silence. Their thinking spins around whether they should approach you or stay withdrawn. They fear letting you down, falling below what you're asking for, or generating suffering they don't want. On the outside, their quiet may look settled. Internally, it's the reverse. They experience your memories again and again. They revisit instances that seemed routine when they occurred, but now hold weight. Discussions, laughter, eye contact, touch, and moments together all get reviewed repeatedly inside their mind. When they attempt to shift their attention to something else, the thinking persists. They examine what they perceive as their shortcomings in comparison to what they respect in you. Typically, they sense they come up lacking. You might imagine they experience detachment, but the actual situation is regularly the reverse. Their emotional experience is so intense that they sometimes become paralyzed by it. They experience two competing impulses at once. One part desperately seeks connection. Another part recoils from what that connection would need from them. The more their hunger for contact strengthens, the more their anxiety typically increases alongside it. They yearn for being together while also feeling compelled to withdraw. Every choice they make to maintain separation holds an inner battle that outsiders rarely observe. Below the barriers they've erected, their affection remains genuine. Even as those feelings remain concealed, they're present. They continuously assess what's dangerous and attempt to identify approaches to prevent damage to both individuals. Their care manifests through restraint, watchfulness, and reflective quiet. All the pauses, all the slowness, and all the silence depict the turmoil occurring underneath. They're navigating personal struggles that you can't resolve for them. Those internal conflicts belong exclusively to them. Even though the space might sometimes resemble being discarded, their pulling away frequently relates to experiences that currently feel too heavy for them to carry by themselves. They likely believe that stepping away represents the wisest approach, even though it creates hurt and bewilderment. What resembles avoidance might simply be the attempt to contain sensations they haven't developed methods to manage. Their spirit continues wrestling with uncertainty, apprehension, wishes, and possibilities. The link persists alive within their being, even when they're unable to communicate it in the methods you're hoping for. While their quiet might leave numerous questions unanswered, it doesn't inevitably eliminate the affection they possess. Often the most powerful feelings are the ones people struggle hardest to articulate. Often the most powerful devotion lives behind the greatest hesitation, and sometimes the space between two individuals communicates a narrative not of indifference, but of a heart that's still figuring out how to encounter feelings it cannot dismiss. They navigate through a mixture of worry, aspiration, and hunger, while attempting to shield both individuals from potential suffering. They feel anxious about dissolving themselves in the connection or falling short of someone they experience as extraordinary. Regardless of the space and silence, something endures without wavering. The depths of their experience run considerable, and they genuinely care. They desire to be woven through your experience, yet they remain suspended between wanting you and experiencing doubt. Their quiet is not proof of missing affection, but love tangled with hesitation, dread, and private disagreement. They work to organize intense feelings with the demands of actual living and regularly wonder if they possess room in your world without generating difficulty or letting you down. Their spirit remains dynamic through personal meditation, hidden musings, and undeclared visions of calm instances together. They hold tight in their own manner, even if it doesn't resemble the obvious ways most people anticipate being held. Their attachment to you endures beneath the surface, communicated through considerations they never express and sensations they hardly ever disclose. One day, when circumstances feel less threatening and their apprehension starts loosening, they might inch forward again. That wouldn't take place because you slipped their consciousness or because what they feel faded. It would occur because authentic devotion very rarely evaporates completely from someone experiencing it intensely. Until that point, the space communicates their individual struggles and acts as a quiet reflection of the emotions they're continuously holding within. They experience missing you in methods they almost never articulate. Love that hasn't involved personal healing frequently generates separation. This represents a demanding reality that numerous individuals avoid acknowledging. Affection by itself isn't sufficient when someone persists in harboring unresolved emotional residue from earlier in life. Encounters involving trust, autonomy, betrayal, or dedication can transform new connection into something that feels risky rather than accepting. What should feel uncomplicated can suddenly become overwhelming. Your existence activates a sensation of obligation that they connect with the possibility of suffering. As a consequence, they generate space not because their affection is shallow, but because their affection disturbs them in ways they can't manage. They aren't completely confident in their capacity to preserve emotional steadiness or to safeguard your being in the manner they think it warrants. This comprehension frightens them because they can see the depth of what you experience and the genuineness of what you bring. Space becomes the safer option compared to risking your harm. Within their consciousness, stepping back seems less damaging than advancing and potentially coming up short. What resembles withdrawing is frequently the effort to prevent inflicting hurt. The more significant the relationship appears, the higher the expectations they create for themselves. That weight can become sufficient to preserve their silence even when they want nothing more than to communicate. And now, contemplate your side in this dynamic and the reason your thinking circles back to them repeatedly. Emotional ties rarely disappear the moment talking stops. Your interior perception identified something significant that remains unresolved. There were feelings that never got articulated, statements that weren't delivered, and possibilities that never received the opportunity to unfold fully. Your thinking returns because something inside you continues searching for comprehension. A narrative that concluded without closure typically leaves behind inquiries that maintain requesting responses. The consciousness naturally moves back to remembrances, what-ifs, and unfinished pieces. When a story feels unfinished, you return to exchanges, reimagine different approaches, and attempt to find importance in the quiet. This exceeds regular reminiscence because it involves the unfinished work of the heart. You remain processing scraps of a connection that never reached its maximum expression. Even as you're functioning to proceed, a section of you persists in seeking resolution, comprehension, or satisfaction. That doesn't suggest insufficiency. It shows the importance of what you experienced. The depth of your recurring thoughts corresponds to the power of the original tie. Cycles of thinking frequently show up when affection becomes blocked before it reaches its greatest potential. They remain behind lasting marks that frequently surface again through recollections, hopes, and lingering questions. These contemplations aren't arbitrary. They arise because the experience mattered. At moments, you may become irritated with yourself for continually reflecting on them. Yet this stays a reasonable response. Your spirit and consciousness are functioning to integrate something your deeper nature grasped as consequential. Even if situations avoided the relationship from expanding, the emotional effect stays legitimate. Separation doesn't erase connection. In several situations, it merely maintains the pause. Comprehending this can bring ease because persistent thinking doesn't necessarily point to inability to progress or defeat. Rather, it means the attachment held genuine substance and persists impacting you in unnoticed methods. Real bonds regularly exist beyond physical proximity. They communicate through unseen impacts that form your feelings, selections, and worldview. All periods of quiet and all stretches of separation might contain lessons that aren't quickly noticeable. Occasionally, the distance carries intention that becomes understandable only later. In numerous situations, space creates opportunity to develop patience, emotional tenacity, and broadened consciousness of your own nature. It inspires you to engage with your experience genuinely, observe your own capacity carefully, and comprehend what actually signifies something to you. The consciousness reviews the attachment, not because it desires to remain captured, but because a component of you acknowledges that affection rarely follows a direct path. Readiness and restoration frequently determine results more than sensation exclusively. The attachment between you contains emotional vitality that doesn't dissipate readily. Rather, it persists peacefully and requests comprehension, acknowledgement, and periodically graciousness. It welcomes transformation rather than struggle. Throughout this phase, you discover that attachment can maintain weight even when it doesn't accomplish flawless completion. It imparts enduring effects that strengthen your emotional knowledge. All returning reflections become sections of your healing. Your spirit remains integrating. Your consciousness continues working. Your interior keeps growing. Over the course of time, you start differentiating between separation generated by fear and separation generated by apathy. You recognize that quiet can become discourse of its own and that retreat periodically disguises feelings rather than confirming their non-existence. Even when not immediately obvious, the attachment stays present in inconspicuous methods. One day, when situations coordinate and restoration develops, the sensation that appears suspended might recommence with increased knowledge and improvement. Before then, tolerance with yourself becomes one of the most advantageous tools available. Experiencing without controlling creates fortitude that proves beneficial long following the circumstance transforms. All unarticulated inquiries and all recollections you examine stand as confirmation of how considerably what happened mattered. They remind you that the attachment held significance. Affection might appear quiet, it might feel withdrawn, yet it never surrenders its importance entirely. They contemplate you during unexpected instances, perhaps as night approaches or in routine circumstances that suddenly bring back your memory. They question how you're doing. They wonder what would have unfolded if they demonstrated more bravery. They imagine other selections and other statements, yet apprehension typically prevents motion. A kind of emotional stasis grows despite their aspirations. They return to previous moments and envision alternate phrases, but reluctance continues prevailing. Something remarkable regarding this separation is that the attachment has the ability to shift them. Genuine transformation terrifies people. You activate regions of their identity they didn't predict encountering. Rather than navigating that immediately, they pull away and delay the unfolding. The space functions as a duration of processing rather than confirmation of missing feeling. It acts as a pause where they're attempting to move through sensations, worries, and private obstacles. Pressing situations like this frequently generates increased unwillingness because it strengthens the fears currently at play. Certain recognitions only emerge through passing time and tranquil contemplation. Acceptance enables comprehension to build without effort. This dynamic doesn't indicate you're impossible to cherish or that your desires were unfounded. The attachment was legitimate. You encountered someone who experienced genuine care, yet wasn't equipped to encounter you at an identical emotional level. That actuality doesn't minimize your importance. Rather, it clarifies that readiness and the right moment frequently influence relationships much more than feelings exclusively. You distributed something consequential, regardless of whether it contained silences and uncertainty. That contributed to impressions in both directions. Gap and quiet don't eliminate what transpired. They regularly indicate spaces requiring additional development and restoration. Affection doesn't consistently fade when it appears hidden. Periodically it hangs in suspension. Periodically it develops below recognition. Periodically, it readies itself till both spirits are equipped to interact with enhanced comprehension. The consequences of your moments together continue traveling with you. They direct how you engage with attachment, understanding, and psychological openness. You acquire tolerance. You develop self-respect. You discover how to identify another individual's inner struggles without sacrificing your personal requirements. You understand that authentic care includes honoring their unseen challenges. Even when communicated through silence, the deepest expressions of affection occasionally shelter behind restraint, apprehension, and uncertainty. That doesn't eliminate their genuineness. It simply makes them more challenging to perceive. Simultaneously, you merit regard that approaches with predictability, transparency, and genuine readiness to be there. The separation and pauses construct part of a broader picture involving restoration, understanding of yourself, and the role of timing. All sensations you absorbed and all memory you maintain demonstrates the attachment held meaning and supported you in recognizing your capacity to experience love profoundly. That comprehension will support more satisfying and fair partnerships later, perhaps with this individual or with somebody altogether new. Honor what you feel while simultaneously creating room for becoming. Respect the transformation happening in both existences. Understand that separation isn't destructive invariably. Sometimes it reshapes feeling into something more conscious, more developed, and more enduring. The connection stays part of your narrative and keeps instructing understanding about endurance, compassion, and psychological truth. Feeling doesn't continuously require closeness. Periodically, it requires gap to expand. Periodically, it asks for quiet to contemplate. Periodically, it demands stepping away so mending can progress. Not every tie persists in its initial expression. Certain ones approach mainly to convey important understanding regarding your own being and your manner of experiencing affection. If they surface at some point down the road, it could arise with deepened consciousness following apprehension releases its hold and recovery creates possibility for bravery. Before that season comes, the gap keeps performing its role within a greater unfolding that neither individual completely comprehends currently. Don't punish yourself for another individual's unhealed suffering, and don't minimize your requirements to attempt to safeguard them. If the attachment is built to succeed, it will ultimately ask both individuals to be completely present rather than partially. If that doesn't materialize, the separation itself could direct you to someone equipped to mirror your capacity with increased dependability. A human can experience profound attachment to you and simultaneously feel unprepared to stay in proximity. That reality stings, but it doesn't determine your importance. Rather, it indicates you toward the kind of affection that deepens without requiring separation as endurance. Your spirit merits care that honors your capacity to give without unceasing confusion. The calm phases and moments of stillness aren't without worth. They equip you for connections that feel matching, grounded, and satisfying. These truths regarding the spirit and consciousness can offer insight when feelings grow complex. Comprehending hidden dynamics permits you to move through relationships with heightened knowledge, comprehension, and kindness toward yourself. Affection might manifest as quiet. It might feel like distance, yet it never completely loses substance. Every portion of this trip contributes to your development and navigates you to the kind of bond that survives with authenticity, bravery, and persistent emotional fortitude.